Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I think I'll go ahead and get started because it's 1 o'clock Central on my watch. So again, thank you for being here. I'm Dr. Emily Vardell, and I'm really excited to help get started our SLIM research webinar series. And there is another one tomorrow that will be led by Dr. Michael Wittersheim. And today I'll be talking a little bit about one of my research projects entitled Conducting a Bibliometric Study of LIS Educators Teaching Health-Related Courses. And I kind of see this a little bit also as kind of pulling back the curtain of research. And so I'll be trying to share a little bit about what went into the research project, how we went about it, how we collaborated, in case that's also helpful for you as you work on research projects or interested in a little bit of the behind the scenes look. I'll also try to keep an eye on the chat. I see this as being fairly casual, fairly open-ended. So if there are questions that you have as I go along, feel free to put those in the chat and I'll try to stop and address them as we go along. Or of course, there should be plenty of time for questions at the end. And just to give you a little bit of background about me and kind of my interest in this project. So this, I believe, is my 6th year teaching at SLIM, and I teach a lot of our health-related courses that count towards our health information professionals certificate in concentration. So we have classes like health sciences librarianship, disaster preparedness. I help develop the consumer health information class that's now usually taught by an adjunct. So I have taught these classes, and I also have a background as a medical librarian. So I received my MLS in 2007 from Texas Women's University and worked as a medical librarian for a few years after that, prior to getting my PhD. And my PhD was in health insurance literacy. So I've kind of continued this health track as I've gone along. And so that all went into this project because we were looking at who's teaching these health-related courses, where are they publishing, how are they communicating with practitioners, or are they communicating with practitioners? And so I think it really helped to have that experience as a medical librarian, as a researcher, as someone who teaches these kind of classes. It was really exciting to bring all of that together in one place for this project. And I did not do this project on my own. I had several co-authors that I worked with, and I've got their information up on the screen now. Hopefully you're seeing that. And so I thought I'd talk a little bit about how the project came about. So Jeff Huber, who's the name in the middle of this, he is currently the director of the School of Information Science at the University of Kentucky. But before that, he taught the health-related courses at Texas Women's University. So as you might guess, I took many of his classes when I was doing my MLS. He was my advisor for my MLS, and I've just kind of stayed in touch with him. And so he reached out to me, I believe in spring 2021 about this project. So about a year and a half ago, he was interested in researching the connections between practice and research when it comes to the health-related health sciences librarianship arena. So he was really the one that had the idea, but again, because he's the director of the program and has many responsibilities, he was looking for partners on the project. And he invited me to serve as a lead on the project. At the time, I was expecting a baby, so I said, I can't be the lead, but I want to be involved in this project. I'm really excited about it. But I suggested, why don't we pull in Deborah Charbonneau? And I've collaborated with her on several research projects. We've been really effective collaborators together. I think our first article was in 2017, and we've just continued on and off to work on projects. We're actually starting to work on co-editing a book together, and I knew she'd be great at keeping us organized and on top of this research project. So she was really, she's the, and I'll kind of mention this at the end too, but we do have an article under review about this project. She's the first author on that article. She's really been the lead on this, and then I would say I probably have done the second most amount of work on the project, helping write the article, keeping us going, but we couldn't have done it with all 5 of the people on the project. Jeff really had the long-term vision about where the project should go and provided some of the historical look at the project as well. And then Jeff pulled in these other 2 researchers, Emily Keene, who I had not worked with before, who was a librarian at the University of Cincinnati and now works for a publisher. But she has a really strong background in data analysis and data visualizations. So some of the visualizations I'll show, some of the analysis that will be presented, Emily took a real lead on that. And then Robert Shapiro also had a strong background in this. So some of the visualizations and analysis I'm going to present were done by him as well. And Robert I had worked with before, but was excited to continue working with him on this project. And he is a practitioner at, you'll see at one of the AHECs, the Area Health Education Centers in North Carolina. So I think 4 out of the 5 of us have PhDs. So we have this research background, but we have kind of, as you can see, a balance of professors and practitioners that was really helpful in approaching this project together. So now I'm going to turn to the project itself. Today, I'm going to share a little bit about the background of what brought us to this project, our problem statement and purpose, the methods that we selected, and I'll really probably spend a good amount of time on the methods because it's one of the more unusual parts of the project, and we're considering perhaps writing up a shorter version of just the methods for people who are interested in studying where LIS faculty are publishing in other areas, as perhaps this could be kind of a model that could be adopted in other scenarios, and then present our core findings and discussion for future work. So what has been done prior? So what's the background on this? There have been some bibliometric studies looking at faculty scholarly output. I've got a highlight of some of the articles here on the slide, and at the end there's a references slide with all of the citations if you're interested in learning more. There was a profile of a typical professor in LIS, and which was kind of more holistic, looking at LIS faculty. And then there have been some studies looking at specific aspects of LIS, like LIS and open access, LIS and health, gender, and health sexual orientation topics, and then an overview of trends in LIS research. So these are some of the seeds that were planted that helped lead to our project. But what we specifically wanted to look at was the publication characteristics of LIS faculty, so library and information science faculty, teaching health courses. And again, it was a really exciting opportunity to look at, are the practitioners and the researchers and the faculty communicating with each other? I would say that health sciences librarianship is probably a more research heavy area of LIS. So perhaps you might hypothesize that there would be more discourse going back and forth between researchers and practitioners, but we were interested, are LIS faculty being included in this? So that's what we were looking at. Where are they publishing? Who's the audience that they're publishing for? That was really what we were interested in studying. So the purpose of this study was to examine the publication patterns of what we were looking at the last 10 years of LIS faculty in LIS programs in the United States and Canada. So again, like I mentioned, I'm going to spend a little bit more time on the methods here because it is one of the more unique aspects of the study and hopefully a contribution of the project. So just to kind of give you a sense of how did we come up with this data set? What went into it? So given the lack of a master list of LIS faculty in this area, we had to construct the sample. So there's no place to go and find a list of all LIS faculty. That doesn't exist currently. Perhaps that can be something that can be developed down the road, but we had to construct this ourselves. And we used a composite approach to identify potential faculty for the sample, and it involves several steps. In all, we identified 29 potential LIS faculty, and I'll show you how we went about that. So here you can see on the slides here, we really focused on full-time LIS faculty teaching health-related courses, and we looked in ALA accredited programs. So first, we looked at course listings over the last 5 years. Between the 5 researchers on the project, we divided up a list of all the ALA accredited programs, and we went one by one through all the programs to find courses that were health related to potentially identify faculty for the study. So again, we were looking at courses offered in the last 5 years. We looked at English language only because we were looking at course descriptions in the websites. So for example, there are ALA accredited programs that have French offerings and Spanish offerings, University of Puerto Rico, and then one of the Canadian ones. So we were looking at English language only. So that's what we focused on for the course listings. We also looked at faculty profiles. So we went onto the websites of the schools that we had divided across the 5 of us and looked at profiles to find this information. We tried to find syllabi were available, although I will say many LIS programs don't make syllabi easy to find. I think at SLIM we do a really good job of that. Maybe we can be a model for that as well. But when syllabi were available, we took a look to try to find health-related classes. We also supplemented this by contacting deans and directors directly. So we created a draft email, and again, divided across the 5 of us, emailed those directors and asked if they could identify faculty that taught health-related courses. We also reviewed membership lists of health-related SIGs. So there were kind of 2 that we focused on. One is the new LIS Health SIG. So that's the Association of Library and Information Science Educators. They have a fairly recent health SIG. So we looked at the list of members there. And then we also looked at the Medical Library Education Caucus of the Medical Library Association, trying to identify as many names as we possibly could, and eventually looking at 29 LIS faculty that were identified and met the inclusion criteria. So when you think about inclusion criteria, sometimes you think about exclusion criteria. So here our exclusion criteria included, we were only looking at full-time LIS faculty, which meant adjunct instructors were not included, and faculty with joint appointments were excluded in the study sample. And that's particularly important for this topic. Again, when it comes to health-related topics, a lot of LIS programs will offer some health electives that are co-taught by faculty in School of Public Health or faculty in a School of Medicine. And so we weren't interested in people who might primarily teach in those areas. We wanted to look specifically at LIS faculty. So in September of 2021, those 29 faculty members that met the inclusion criteria were contacted via email to voluntarily share their CV, their curriculum vitae, their resumes. And 16 respondents provided, which was a 55% response rate, which we were pretty happy with. We felt like that was a pretty strong response rate. This was further supplemented by locating any additional CVs publicly available online. So again, we divided up that list of the remaining faculty who had not responded to us, looked online, and were able to find 5 more CVs to add to the study sample that seemed up to date and were included in the list of the faculty members. So the final sample again was 21 faculty members. And we then basically collected the publication information from those CVs. So we looked at 2011 to the present. Again, we wanted to look at the last 10 years of publications from these 21 LIS faculty members. And we analyzed this using descriptive bibliometrics. And I'll go into that in more detail as we go along, what exactly we were looking at. But, oh, I'm sorry. That just skipped past. Here we go. But that was the approach that we took, was mostly using descriptive analysis of the publications that were available in the CVs. So we should know, I have a slide about limitations, but I think it's important to note here as well that there is a possible limitation of the study in that we were specifically looking at CVs. We relied on the CVs for the publication information. So we're relying on the CVs, that the information that the faculty provided themselves. We made the conscious decision to analyze CVs for faculty scholarly output, and because conference proceedings are not always indexed in databases. So another approach could have been, let's find these faculty names and search them in Google Scholar or Web of Science or Scopus and find the output there. But we decided that is not necessarily a holistic look at what people are publishing. There might be many venues where that wouldn't come up, as particularly conference proceedings. So let's say, for example, again, we were looking at that communication between practitioner and researcher. So ALA conference proceedings, Medical Library Association conference proceedings, things like that probably aren't going to come up in Google Scholar or other resources like that. And so we thought CVs was a more perhaps authoritative, or certainly a more comprehensive look at what people are out, their scholarly output. And just as a note, I will say, I should have mentioned this in the previous slide, we did exclude introductory courses where health was mentioned, but not a focus. So we're specifically looking at faculty teaching classes that the main focus of the class is health. So again, we pulled out those CVs, and I'll say just kind of the nuts and bolts of how this was done. We had those 21 CVs, and I actually asked my research assistant at the time, Dr. Ting Wong, to help with that. And so she went through the CVs, and we used Google Drive for everything. So we had a Google sheet where she pulled out the publications for each of the 21 faculty members and categorized them based on the year, what the publication type was, like was it a journal article, a chapter, a conference proceedings, was it peer reviewed or not? And sometimes that was hard to identify. I'll talk about that a little bit more as I go along as well. But she helped tremendously with that process. So I want to give her an acknowledgement there. And eventually, from those 21 faculty, the bibliometrics analysis was based on a total of 716 publications. So that was kind of the final end number of publications that we were looking at. And again, that could include articles, chapters, conferences, included, any of those kind of publications was a part of that, published from 2011 to 2021 and reported on the CVs. Again, please let me know if you have questions. I'm happy to stop and elaborate if it would be helpful, or answer questions as I go along. But if there aren't any questions at this time, I will turn to some of our key findings. So this is what we started with, and I'll say that we really see this as the first step in this research. Much more research could be done on the topic, and at the end I'll conclude with some ideas of where the research could continue, but you can only bite off a certain chunk of amount of information for the first stage. So this is what we ultimately decided we would focus our article on. So first, the most popular the most popular venues, the total number of publications per faculty member, the number of publications per year to look to see if there were trends over time, the publication types, what were the highly cited papers, and then a little bit on authorship patterns, although we acknowledge that a lot more work could be done in that area as well. So over the next few slides, key publication patterns will be presented. So first was popular venues, and this is a tree chart. This is one of those helpful visualizations that Robert and Emily worked on. We thought this was more engaging, more interesting, perhaps more innovative than a pie chart. We wanted to look at, just quickly visually, you can see here, what are the popular publication venues? And just at a quick glance, you can see that journal articles and conference proceedings are the top publication types for this audience, which is interesting, because you'll think maybe in other disciplines, faculty, perhaps books or book chapters might be the leading area. Perhaps in some more of the more technical areas, conference proceedings would dwarf everything. But here it's a somewhat equal balance, although journal articles is the most popular, between journal articles and conference proceedings. So this shows you the distribution of publication venues for all publication types in this sample. The year range, again, is 2011 to the present. And this count here does include in-press publications that were listed on faculty CVs for 2022. So you'll see first, journal articles were the most popular way to disseminate publications. And this does include both peer-reviewed and non-peer-reviewed articles combined. This is followed by published conference proceedings. These were clearly the two leading publication types. And you'll see that book chapter was the next most popular, but far fewer than the other two categories. One question that we've gotten about this, because I did present a poster on some of this at LIS recently in the last conference I attended, was could there be duplications of journal articles on here? So let's say there were faculty members that wrote a journal article together. Would that be included twice? Yes. So we did not go about eliminating duplicates in the sample because of difficulties in consistency on formatting and being sure. And we just wanted to get a holistic view about what faculty were doing. So let's say, I know, for example, that there might be two people who published an article together. That would be counted twice here. But that, of course, is going to be true whether they published a book chapter together. That would also be counted twice. But this is just looking holistically at what the faculty are doing. And there might be some instances where an article could be counted twice if it was published by two of the people in our population, if that makes sense. This bar graph shows the breakdown of publications per year over time. And so you'll see that there are fewer publications listed here. That is because this bar graph is based on 708 publications because we removed 2022 or in press at the time. We left off 2022 because 2022 is currently still in progress, even though we're almost at the conclusion. And we wanted to make sure that this was kind of a final look at it. So the year range represented in the bar chart is 2011 to 2021 inclusive. And you'll notice some initial observations include 2011 seems lower in comparison to other years. And it's hard to speculate possible explanations for this, but it could also be worthy of future investigation. You'll also notice that 2017 and 2020 show some peaks of scholarly output, which we found was very interesting, particularly when you think about the COVID-19 pandemic happening in 2020 and all the potential disruptions that happened to scholarly output during that time. It was still a pretty high publication year for this population of faculty. Here, I want to note some of the average number of publications per faculty. So this is looking at those 21 faculty members we had in our sample. On average, they had 34 publications each over the last 10 years. The median was 29, the lowest was 4, so 4 publications for one faculty member, and the highest was a whopping 98 publications for one faculty member. It's kind of interesting just to see the scope and range of publication output for this faculty group. In contrast to conference venues, the most popular journal venues for peer-reviewed and did I go past the conference venues? I thought I had that on the slide. Let me see. Oh, I'm sorry. So the conference venues were a mix of practitioner and journal-oriented, practitioner and researcher-oriented. I'm going to show you the journal articles. So here, and again, I just want to note that these include both peer-reviewed and non-peer-reviewed articles. They really represent some of the core LIS journals. So you can see on here, and these are, again, more library-focused, like Medical Reference Services Quarterly, and the Journal of the Medical Library Association. These are what might be considered more practitioner-oriented journals. So while we're not addressing journal impact factors presently in this study, the journals do include a range of impact factors. And you'll notice that informatics-related journal venues are popular among this group of LIS faculty. So starting here at this level, you see informatics here. So that does continue to be pretty popular among this group of LIS faculty, as well as JSIST and other more technical or information science focused journals. But we thought this was helpful. Again, there's no master list of journal articles that you can go to and say, what are the core journal articles on health sciences librarianship? There are places that you can go to get some ideas, but it was interesting for us to see what emerged as being really popular journal venues for this group of scholars. So here you'll see peer-reviewed journal articles. So this is where we did our best to remove the non-peer-reviewed journal articles. Again, this was easier for some than others. Some faculty members made this really clear in their CVs, and for some we weren't sure. So there are some limitations in this reporting, but you'll notice immediately that the top 5 most popular journal titles do change from the previous slide. So first, the most popular for peer-reviewed is JSIST, then followed by JMIR, which is a journal of medical internet research. This is a really popular and highly ranked journal, but it does require a very sizable author fee, which is interesting. Then followed by Journal of Biomedical Informatics, Journal of Consumer Health on the Internet, and JMLA. So still a mix of practitioner and kind of more research-oriented articles, journals, but it does change when you take out some of the non-peer-reviewed. So here comes the slide with conference venues. I knew I had it on here. So while MLA, the Medical Library Association, was on the list of conference venues, which might be seen as one of the more practitioner-oriented venues, ASIST, AMIA, and LIS were the top 3 conference venues for published proceedings among this group of LIS scholars, which we thought was pretty interesting. So faculty teaching health informatics or doing informatics-related research may help explain faculty publications in conference proceedings beyond LIS venues. So you'll see like AMIA and IEEE, which is I think the 5th one on that list there. Some other ones that may be less familiar for those of us who are more in the library science focused side of things. I think again that faculty teaching health informatics probably accounts for the popularity of those conference venues. But this does really show that there are various audiences for communicating LIS faculty research and highlights that faculty are disseminating their research more broadly with other disciplines. So we thought that was really interesting. It wasn't really only focused on LIS, popular LIS conference venues. You really saw it going pretty far and wide in terms of where people are presenting their findings. Then we also analyzed the most highly cited papers authored by this group of LIS faculty, and this is based on Scopus data. So LIS faculty authors in our sample have been bolded. Their names are here. I will say that we tried to de-anonymize anonymize the data as much as we possibly could. We wanted to not necessarily list the 21 faculty that are included on our list of LIS faculty, but it's hard to do with looking at the most highly cited papers. We toyed around with, okay, do we just remove the author names? But that would be easy to find if you went and looked. How far do you go to remove it? So we ultimately decided that it was unlikely people would be upset to be included on a list of highly cited authors. So we included the specific information here. The table is limited, this table is limited to publications with 100 or more citations. So here you'll see the top 7 highly cited articles, and the journal titles are highlighted in yellow. Again, kind of echoing some of those journals that we saw earlier, but you'll notice that they're much more medical in focus, most of them, rather than LIS focused. One article listed here entitled Quality of Health Information for Consumers on the Web, this last one here, has 2 authors included in our data set, which we thought was interesting. Both Zhang and Z are listed here, and they were both featured on our list of 21 authors. So future work might evaluate subject matter of highly cited articles. That could be a helpful next step, but we do acknowledge that there are limitations in looking at specifically at citation metrics. There are many other ways to evaluate impact of an article, but this is a first step in looking at it. And we thought it was interesting to see the focus of this research, which, as you can tell, is very medical, very technological, very informatics heavy. So again, here, when looking at authorship patterns, this total includes journal publications and published conference proceedings. So we took a look at all of the publication output, and we grouped the authorship patterns into 3 main categories. One is joint authorship first author. So that's on this slide, the blue color. So this is where there are multiple authors, but the faculty member we were looking at was listed first. Then we also looked at joint authorship, not the first author. That is by far the main, you can see the bulk of the publications were under that category. So multiple authors, but the person we were focusing on was not listed as first. And then solo, which, as the name suggests, is when someone authors something independently. So a key finding is that joint authorship patterns overall were much more common, as you can see, than solo authorship. And this highlights potential avenues for future research. We're interested in looking at types of collaborations like faculty and practitioner collaborations, international, disciplinary, and we also want to mention that you should interpret author order with caution, as author order varies per disciplines. For example, in the medical field, often the last author is really important. That's the person who might own the lab or have the grant, and so that placement is important, whereas in other fields that may not be the same case. So we did want to mention that there's a caveat in looking at authorship patterns, but it's most certainly helpful in seeing that joint authorship is really common, but that not necessarily are people the lead author on the article. And this is the last tree map I'm going to show. This is looking at authorship patterns by publication type. So again, looking at solo author, first, joint first. So as we're saying, there are multiple authors, but they are listed as first, or joint, not first. So you can see they're listed as either joint, first, or solo. This is a visual representation of the authorship patterns in various publication types. For this slide, I want to draw your attention to the colors and what they signify rather than the text. This color-coded visualization shows that journal articles, shown in dark blue, conference posters in yellow, and conference presentations in the lighter blue were the most predominant publication types. And within these three publication types, joint authorship was by far the most common author type. You can see here, journal articles is 181 were joint, conference presentations 116, and conference posters 116, conference presentations 42, followed by first authorship for journal articles and conference posters, and solo authorship for conference presentations. So probably the largest kind of cut of where people were solo was in that conference presentations, which is kind of interesting to think that people collaborate on journal articles and posters, but for a presentation, it might be more popular to be a solo presenter rather than other categories. We're going to continue to work with this data, and we plan to provide more details about this in the manuscript that's under review. But I think it's interesting to look at both visually, color-wise, and also the size of the box, thinking about how people are presenting. And thanks, Sarah, for the feedback on the visualization. So finally, at this point, I'm going to transition to a discussion of preliminary findings and share some recommendations for future areas of research. So first, this study contributes to the literature by addressing gaps and represents the first step in examining the research output for this LIS community of scholars. First, as we've noted, faculty published in a range of LIS interdisciplinary journals. Second, journal articles were the most popular publication venue, followed by conference proceedings. And additionally, we found that the top 5 journals for peer-reviewed and non-peer-reviewed publications were MRSQ, JSIS, JMIR, JMLA, and Biomedical Informatics. We also observed several publication trends. Joint authorship patterns were the most common, highlighting the collaborative nature of LIS research. LIS faculty published in interdisciplinary journals, including Biomedical Informatics, BMC, Medical Informatics, and Decision Making, and PLOS One, all of which are highly interdisciplinary and aren't necessarily LIS-specific journals. LIS faculty were also represented in interdisciplinary conferences such as ACM, AMIA, and IEEE. And interestingly, highly cited papers appeared in health-specific journals, reaching broader audiences, for example, Health Psychology and Frontiers in Public Health. And then articles with 11 or more authors appear to be predominantly published in non-library science fields. So this was, rare, but happened commonly enough in our population that we thought it was worth noting that there were some of the faculty who were listed in articles that had very long author lists, and these were all, without exception, published in non-library science fields, like some of those kind of core health-specific journals mentioned earlier. So some of our recommendations, we think it might be helpful that for LIS journals focused on health sciences to issue a targeted call for papers from LIS faculty, consider a column devoted to research issues in LIS education, host a periodic column covering current trends in LIS education, and explore ways to encourage and promote collaboration among LIS faculty and health information professionals. This is one of those things that has been in the zeitgeist and in the dialogue for a long time, is how do we strengthen these connections? And we think that these suggestions might provide concrete ways to do that. Again, I mentioned some of the limitations earlier, but we do want to highlight a few others. So one, the list of health sciences related courses was limited to information publicly available on school websites. And again, we try to supplement this by contacting deans and directors directly and searching where we could, but this is limited to what was available and to who responded to us. We also, again, chose to exclude introductory courses where health was mentioned, but not a focus, as well as courses taught outside of faculty outside of LIS. So for example, elective courses, we really wanted to look at those core LIS faculty teaching in this area. And then the study sample, again, was limited to self-reporting by the faculty members since we extracted this publication information directly from individual CVs. And we did try to verify things when possible with Google Scholar and Web of Science, particularly for some of those in-press citation information. For some of those, when we received the CVs, they eventually did get published with the publication date where we were able to include it if it was 2021 or prior. But for some of them where it was still in press or it was published in 2022, we had to adjust as needed. So for future research, moving forward, this analysis provides insight into additional areas where future research would be helpful. More work needs to be done with regards to adjunct faculty and faculty in other departments teaching health-related courses in MLIS programs. Another possibility would be looking at author network analysis, such as looking at faculty in LIS programs, non-LIS areas, and practitioners. A citation analysis of highly cited papers, looking at the research topics. This is, I think, an interesting idea, looking at analysis of subject headings and trends over time. So looking at those journal articles, what were the subject headings assigned to them, and how have the topics that people are publishing on evolved over time. And then finally, looking at research output, potentially by faculty rank and or gender, to see trends in that area as well. So that concludes an overview of this research project. I'm excited to answer questions from you all. I will conclude by showing you this references list here of some of those background articles that I mentioned at the very beginning, but I will now turn and see if there are questions for the research that was presented today. And I'll go back to the future research slide in case there are questions about that, but I'm happy to go back to previous slides and stop on, particular findings if that would be helpful. Thanks, Laura. I appreciate no questions, but this is really interesting. As I mentioned, we presented a poster about this at the LIS conference and got a lot of really great input on it. As I mentioned, people were interested in applying these same methods to other areas, like let's say LIS faculty teaching archives classes. That's just one example, but it's interesting to think about where people are publishing and who they're publishing with. So what were the disciplinary backgrounds of the faculty in your sample? That's a great question, Amanda. We do have the CV, so we could look at where people did their education. We did not capture that in our analysis, but that might be something to add. I like that idea, maybe where they got their PhDs or if they were, LIS focused PhDs. I'll make a note of that. I'll say, just kind of knowing the sample and having worked with the data, I would say there is certainly a mix. There are lots and probably does follow where people are publishing to. That could be something interesting to kind of extend, but there was certainly a core group of faculty that really are LIS focused, have their PhD in LIS, and probably, again, publish more in the LIS journals, present more in LIS venues. And then I think there are definitely kind of another group that are maybe more health informatics focused. And so I wouldn't know without looking whether or not their PhDs were in informatics focused programs that are housed in like an LIS program, or if there are often, departments of health informatics, for example, which are really outside of LIS, but they obviously, again, can kind of continue that research trajectory and publish and present in more informatics focused venues. Any other questions?
Well, I vividly remember that Jeff asked me via email, who actually in your department, in your school are teaching health informatics or whatever that, discipline. So I was wondering why does he, ask that question. So good, well, thanks for this great presentation. I have a couple of questions, if you don't mind.
Please, yeah.
So, see, you kind of mentioned about kind of limitations about number of publications. per year.
Mhm.
But I was thinking of there are probably many factors.
Mhm.
For example, number of years of their employment.
Mhm.
They kind of fluctuating. I mean, there are long timers, but at some point, many kind of retired suddenly,
Mhm.
and then they didn't hire new ones. So they could be factor that's and also the new ones probably do not have many publications. So we probably I don't know, that's a worthwhile to look into those all the kind of factors. And also the cite the most cited pieces. And to me, it would be interesting to see if the other co-authors influence, I mean, the famous people at the end or at
Yeah.
the beginning that actually make the piece cited most. So not necessarily the
Yeah.
person from the the sample is
Mhm.
influencing or not. So that would be interesting kind of finding if there is either way, so and also you kind of pointed out it's interesting to see not MLA conference, but other conferences they kind of published more. But that's kind of consistent with my observation so far. Like ALA, believe it or not, it is very difficult to present at ALA, as a faculty member, simply because there are many competitions to
Mhm.
be selected. It seems very kind of random, so
Mhm.
I have one incident in Milwaukee. The faculty member was so furious for not being selected at ALA conference because he was so confident. Okay, it's kind of piece of cake, didn't get it. So,
Mhm.
so upset about that. So it's interesting observation. It's kind of consistent observation.
Yeah, let me pull that out. I agree. I think it is really interesting. Like you can see it's, I mean, probably like maybe 6 presentations from ALA. And I think a lot of people in this group of scholars sometimes have difficulty finding the right conference venues because some people say, oh, that's too health, we don't do health, or that's too technological, or that's not technology, that's not tech enough. So it is really interesting to see where people are finding success presenting.
Yep. Hey, good, thank you.
Yeah, and I was just going to echo when you were saying about the years. Yes, that was kind of one of our hypotheses as well, is that there, let's say, for example, if we had done this in 2017, there would have been faculty that were teaching health related courses who were really prolific for all the years going up, but they retired. And so now they're not in our sample. And so the people that we have in our sample are more recent graduates who don't have the longevity to have published, in 2011, they were, still in school or whatever. So yeah, it was interesting to think about. This is sort of a snapshot in time, but we thought 10 years was a good amount of time to just see what were the trends. I did think it was interesting that just randomly 2018 was lower, and we don't really have a great hypothesis of why, but personally that was a year that I didn't have a lot either, so I thought that was really interesting that I didn't feel too out of the norm, because other people seem to have had a quieter year that year too. And of course, probably more will be added to that. Probably now there would be more added to that 2021 category, because we did collect the CVs in September 2021. And so there may have been some publications that came out later on. But we wanted to, again, capture that moment in time. But we did try to, some of the ones that were in press, we did take the effort to add them to the sample if they had been published in the intervening time. But I do want to, again, applaud all of my co-authors for the work on this. It really was a team effort. And I think it was an example of using and building on each other's strengths, that we all added something to the table. And so it's definitely a helpful example of when it's good to collaborate with other people. As we saw, joint authorship patterns are really common with this group. And so I really benefited from learning from the other people in the team, and want to thank Ting again for her help with the data at the beginning. And again, we have an article for this under review that we're hoping we'll hear back from any day. We've also considered, like I mentioned, a shorter piece on our methods as an idea for other disciplines to look at. And then we have ideas for research going forward, like looking at the subject headings and things long term. But thanks everyone for coming. I really appreciate the opportunity to share this with you all. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. And as I mentioned, Dr. Witterstein will be giving a presentation tomorrow at the same time. So I'm looking forward to following the presentations from other researchers at SLIM. It's exciting to see what everyone's been up to.